everyone for joining us this afternoon for our second Market Insights program. We're delighted you could join us. My name is Kelly Annis. I am the Executive Director of ULI here in St. Louis, and we're thrilled to have you along with us today. The Market Insights program is an opportunity for ULI to bring professionals and companies to the table who have particular insights or experiences to share with ULI members and real estate professionals in our market. And the folks from CannonDesign not only have a fantastic presence here in town, but operate on a national basis. So we'll be interested to hear what they have to say about the various perspectives they're seeing around the country. Just a few notes before we get started. Because networking is kind of tough in these days, what we like to do is to add our company name to your Zoom profile. So I'm going to do that right now. There's a little blue box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen where your photo is, and you can just retype in whatever you would like it to say. So I'm going to put my name and my company name. So that way, when we get to the point, oh, look at you, Ken, good job. When we get to the point where we do the Q&A, we'll pull down the screen share. Everybody else will be up on the screen, and we can see one another and our affiliation and just get to know one another a little bit better that way. At this point in the pandemic, I'm assuming everybody knows where the mute button is. If you haven't figured that out, send me a note in the chat. And also, if you have any other problems or technical difficulties, send me a note in the chat privately or share it publicly, whatever you feel like doing. If you have questions for our presenters as they're going through their material, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll give you a shout or call on you when we get to the Q&A portion, and we can cover that question then, or I can ask the question for you when we get to the Q&A, your preference. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Ken Crabiel. Ken leads CannonDesign's commercial practice, helping organizations and institutions shaping exciting new futures for their people, businesses in the city, and those who call it home. Ken has 2 decades of experience with proven design strategy and development, project management, and client engagement experience. He excels at understanding organizations' unique challenges and needs and challenges in businesses in order to view design possibilities through their eyes, bringing design to life. And joining Ken is Michelle Rotherham. Michelle leads Cannon's interior design practice and is an NCIDQ certified interior designer with experience across commercial, health, and educational markets. She has more than 12 years experience designing commercial environments for all scales for multiple markets, and Michelle holds deep knowledge of the entire design process. We've also posted their full biographies on the website. If you'd like to learn more about Ken or Michelle, you can find that information there. And I'll also let everybody know that we are recording today's session. If you want to go back and revisit any of the information that's covered, we'll be having that posted also on the website or sent out via email probably first of next week. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Michelle and Ken to share their thoughts with the group on what they see happening in our market and beyond.
All right, thanks, Kelly. You can see my screen okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I was excited we got a full group today. So we'll be in presenter mode for a little bit, like Kelly mentioned, but we are going to stop at a few points during this presentation, because really, you know, when we're thinking about the future and the evolution of the workplace, no one really knows, you know, what is going to happen. But you know, as experts in the industry, we can make predictions and talk upon what we're hearing from clients and what we're experiencing ourselves right now on what we think the future holds. So we're looking forward to hearing from you too when it comes to all of this. So 2020 has been a disruptor of a year for sure. Sometimes in a heartbreaking way, but you know, I think when we're thinking about the evolution of the workplace, it's very interesting to think about how this year is going to change the way that we work together. And Ken and I can talk about this stuff all day, but yeah, we're excited again to hear to hear your thoughts as well. So we're going to talk mostly about the workplace today and how we work together and what is the workplace anymore. But before we get into the specific topic, I kind of want to just like high level, what were we looking at before 2020? Like what were some of the trends? So these certainly aren't all of them, but what are a few of them that were trending? And one of them is obviously technology has allowed mobile work to be normal. So, you know, everybody went to work from home. It's not necessarily a new thing that people work away from the office, but the accelerated trend in which we're seeing right now is certainly different than what it was before 2020. Employee experience is a major design consideration, so companies are looking and paying a lot more attention to what that experience looks like when it comes to amenities, you know, the office space in general. What does that really mean for someone and getting them to come and spend their working days with you? Focus on health and wellness, which is a wonderful trend that I hope we continue to see for decades. You know, healthy, happy workers are good for companies. So I think companies are starting to recognize that. And then lastly, just war on talent. There's a lot of competitive markets out there and not enough people to work in them. So there's really been kind of a shortage in that. So again, that employee experience comes in even further. So then workplace predictions for after 2020, after we've undergone the many different challenges of 2020, we're thinking that knowledge work will evolve to include widespread flexibility in location and time. So we'll get a little bit further into that. So not only we're able to be mobile, but what does that really mean on a widespread level? And it's complicated, but it's also really encouraging and exciting to think about how all of our lives could change, you know, if all of a sudden things were just slightly different. Employee experience is equally physical and digital. So as people may not be in the office every day, what does that digital experience mean? Focus on mental health is paramount. I think we've seen over the past 3 months, you know, checking in with each other, making sure that everybody's okay, really has just, you know, it's been really important, and it's really brought to the forefront how important mental health is, and hopefully that will continue. And then lastly, diversity inclusion is a social responsibility. So it's not just a war on talent, it's how do we make sure that we are developing equal opportunities within that talent pool. So, you know, that will not go away, and it is really up to all of us to make sure that continues. So today's presentation, we're really going to talk more about that knowledge work evolving in the location and time. People that get together with me are probably annoyed. I literally just keep bringing this up to hear other people's thoughts about it, because it is, it's a very, you know, it's a very debatable topic whether or not people are comfortable with not just going back to the way things were. So it's always, I'm really always excited to hear other people's thoughts. So knowledge work will evolve to include widespread flexibility in location and timing. But why, you know, why are we seeing that right now? So stay-at-home orders have accelerated the experiment of working outside the office, obviously. And I think we've proved it works. You know, not that this is the only way to work, but we've proved that it can work. So I think people are all of a sudden seeing, you know, companies that certainly were not even considering allowing their staff to work outside the office on any regular basis, all of a sudden had to. So what did our work look like? It kind of went from the majority of the people working in the office. Certainly there were people working at home and people working really anywhere, traveling from place to place in a coffee shop. Mobility allowed us to do these things, but we weren't necessarily doing them on a a wide scale. So what does our work look like today, and certainly over the past 3 months, we've kind of gone from very few people working in an office to all of us working out of our homes. You know, we at CannonDesign, we have a facilities optimization group, and they still were working anywhere because they had to work with their clients to, you know, figure all of this out. You know, how do we make sure our HVAC systems are optimized in order to combat this? So it's been interesting to see. The majority of us, though, have been operating out of our homes. So what will our work look like? And this is really where that prediction comes in. We don't necessarily see it going back to the way things were, because all of our eyes are open now into it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But we also don't think that the answer is to completely go, you know, stay where we are either, because I think we're all missing a lot of the things that an office space brings to us. So why not go back to the way things were? Opportunities exist at the office, at home, they really exist everywhere. So how do we make the most out of all of those? And really, flexibility is going to become the most important amenity to people. That is the resounding theme that I'm seeing, no matter what challenges people bring up with some people being remote, some people in the office, you know, this person's here or there during this time. Flexibility is important to everybody in some way, shape, or form. So I think that really is going to become that's going to be that piece from a war on talent that becomes the most important. So companies are going to have to respond to that. So some of the opportunities for having an office, you know, because there's been like countless news articles lately about the office will just go away. And that is not true. We still need our office spaces. I think they're just going to look different. And people are missing being together to do their work. So a few of the things that we've thought about are, the first one being equality among all team members. So when we say that, we really mean when you go into an office, everyone that goes has access to the same resources. Everybody's internet is the same. You know, you're not me who's always dropping off of a call because my internet is horrible at home. People, you know, that one particularly became resounding to me when I was on a call with 5 different offices within Canon, and we all had our video on, and just throughout the different geographic regions, it was so different what people, you know, had in terms of an extra workspace. So one of I was able to get into a guest room at my house where we have a desk set up, but my colleague in Manhattan was working in her studio apartment with her 2-year-old and 6-month-old, I believe, and her husband, who's also an architect. So they were, you know, people's situations away from the office are different. The office allows us to kind of give people that equal opportunity to get their best work done. Cultivate culture is a big one, I think. Now, culture is not only about the workplace, but the workplace contributes to it. You know, culture is really about how your leadership behaves and how, you know, what's acceptable and what isn't. That's sort of what helps to drive culture. And I think that where we're at right now, you know, everybody was in the office and then went away. Our culture was established, right? People knew what it was. So it's not necessarily, you may not think it's as important, but think about if we were continuing to be virtual 2 years from now and we needed to onboard new staff, how does, you know, it's a lot harder to, you know, explain who you are as a company and for people to become ingrained in the culture without being able to be physically present, at least sometimes. Collaboration in person, I think all of us have been missing that to some degree. It's not that it isn't possible, because obviously we're all we're all together right now, but you know, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but in-office collaboration is certainly an opportunity. Mentoring by observation. I have 2 young designers that I work with, that one of them was a month and a half out of school when we all went home. And I know that she is craving that in-person, just like listening to what's going on. She got a taste of it, and now, you know, she's really excited to be getting back to the office because she knows that, you know, that's a huge part of her developing as a designer. And then lastly, socialization. You know, we have a lot of people who were at home by themselves for a long time, or, you know, only with their spouse and children, and just, God, they want to talk to somebody else. So that socialization part, I think, is I hear very few arguments about that one, that's a nice perk for being in the office. So I'm wondering, what else? Like, what is everybody missing? So Kelly, I don't know if it's possible to open it up so that people can chatter. I'm just sort of interested in what you all are seeing or hoping to get back.
Sure. Let's take a moment, and if folks want to add what they're missing to the chat box, that would be a good opportunity to make use of that feature.
Cool. Well, I'll go to the next one, but please continue to think about that one. So then, what are the opportunities at home? You know, gosh, the office sounds great. I've made it sound like there are so many opportunities, but so why wouldn't we just go back to the way things were when we are majority of time in the office? Work-life balance is a huge one. I've definitely heard from a lot of people, I'm not interested in going back to the way things were. You know, I love the fact that I get to see my kids more. I get to, you know, again, that's sort of that equitable experience piece of things. Some people in larger metropolitan areas are in the car for 2 hours a day, going from one place to the other. And, you know, to cut that out at least a portion of the time would be a huge, huge improvement to life, really. I work 15 minutes away from my office. So it's, you know, for me, that doesn't resonate as much, but I can imagine that would be huge. That picture right there, the work-life balance picture, is a colleague of Ken and I's in Buffalo, New York, and that's his daughter. They do yoga breaks. Like, I mean, people have been able, it's sort of been dreamy what people have been able to experience during this.
Well, and you know, Michelle, that as I see questions are starting to come in, and I would encourage others to pop in as well. We'll get over to those. But similar to the photo on the left there that you're talking about with Mike and his family doing yoga, you know, my family took that on, not yoga. So for those of you that know me, don't ask me to do yoga. But our family took that on as like a daily break to get some exercise at 10 o'clock every morning. Michelle knows this. Like, it was just kind of our pre-planned every morning. I'd take 15 minutes to go down and do something with them. And there's there's value in our family for that. But to my own example of an opportunity working at home is it actually provides a moment of relief from the busy of the office. And I think that, and this is all of this is very personal, but for me, it was just, hey, where can I catch my breath to think about what's really important? And it's kind of that weird balance. In some ways, you need the activity and the excitement, some people do, of the office and the impromptu-ness of collaboration, things like that. But other times you need moments of reflection. And sometimes for some people, home provides that. I know it definitely does for me. So maybe if we could kind of turn over to some of these questions or comments. I don't know, Michelle, if you can see them, but some of the things.
Yeah, right now.
Okay, then some of the things that I'm seeing here are talking about, you know, that impromptu banter back and forth, and the energy and the buzz of an office, you know, that just activity. Again, going to the comments of socialization, right? You know, that we as humans are just in a way programmed to various levels of needing activity in our lives and people in our lives. And sitting at one particular desk, at one particular chair at home doesn't fill that need or fill that cup for interaction with others. I'm just seeing some other things here that are talking about.
Looks like some people are missing their commute in a way.
Yeah.
I have heard that. Yeah, I've heard that a few times too. That is sort of the unwind period for some people.
So let's keep going. I'm going to monitor these questions, so please keep them coming. But just knowing the content we have in front of us, Michelle, why don't you keep going?
Yeah, actually, I just got kicked off of my internet, so hold on just a moment. I'm going to run back to my desk, and being in the office, I'm going to put my mask back on. So excuse me for just a second. Maybe I'm back on now.
There you go.
You know, as you're traveling,
well,
you're already done. Okay. I was just going to say, this is Kelly. I think there was an article in the newspaper, in Business Journal, early on in the process where they were interviewing CEOs about the shift from the office to home and how their employees were adjusting. And I think it was even maybe, can't remember which CEO was saying that he missed the time to process in between meetings. When you have a day full of Zoom meetings left and right, and they're backed up one right next to each other, even just moving from one conference room to another in between meetings gave that person headspace to process what they heard and to prepare for the next meeting. And a lot of that's missing right now.
I think many of us would second that, Kelly.
Yep. Time to go to the restroom, because a lot of people have made that mistake.
There is a question. Someone's asking if either of you have studied the effect of working from home based on age or experience group. And I think, Michelle, you alluded to that a little bit with regard to your younger colleague who was just getting a taste of the mentoring available in the in-person session. But are there other differences you're seeing or noticing based on age or experience?
Yeah, I don't know, Ken, I feel like within our staff, the more tenured people are missing the office just as much as the younger ones. I mean, and maybe that could be partly because that is what they know and that's how they've been working for 30 years. But I think that they also understand their role in mentoring those younger people. And they're seeing that, God, it's a lot harder to give feedback when it all has to be planned, or, you know, I think it's just different for them. So I don't know, Ken, you have...
I would maybe veer a bit away from kind of the age and years of experience piece of that, and maybe echo a little more of what Michelle's saying, which is about what you know and what you're used to. And so I do think that those who are used to and familiar with going into the office every day, being at their desk, mentoring the people that are sitting directly next to them, and things like that. That's what they're used to. And I think there's a longing to kind of be back to that. Whereas, as I'm seeing with some of the chatter here, you know, those of us that maybe are more pre-programmed, or our experience is more mobile, whether that be all the time or part of the time or whatever, we long for that, which is more of that balance. And I don't know that it's necessarily totally an age thing. But we are, I would say, in the one, if you want to call it, demographic category that we are noticing, is that those that are, I'll say, more fresh or newer to their careers, very much are gravitating and longing to be back. It's not just in the one case that Michelle is referencing, which that individual very forwardly came to us and said, I can't wait to be back. Like she was like halfway through this, like, I want to get back. How soon can we get back? And Michelle and I led the reentry chain for our office, and we kept telling her it's going to happen. But we're seeing it even with some of our other groups, where folks that are maybe in those first, let's say, 4 years of their career, are probably the one group that absolutely wants to get back right away. I mean, they're really longing for it, which is just kind of been interesting. And that's not just within our organization, but it's with some of our clients that we're speaking with as well. Yep.
And interestingly, the socialization piece is coming through for a few of our larger clients. That, you know, that's sort of that piece. And of course, that's cultural. But I think that it's really interesting to see how bad people want to come back at least a part of the time, just so that they can interact in person with their team members.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more shocking conversations that I've had in the past couple months was with one of our clients who is, I'll say, thinking about, I don't know, they've really made a decision, but they're thinking about, is there a role as an organization to provide socialization opportunities for their employees? Does that become their new approach to real estate? Is to provide opportunities for people to interact with others? Which, when you really start to dig into it, it's kind of an interesting concept. So we'll have to see where that goes, but it's definitely something that they're discussing at pretty high levels within the organization. So.
Yeah. Right. So lastly, just in terms of opportunities at home, just having focus and control over the environment. One of the things that came up, we've been having a few calls with just, people on the commercial team across the country, and just sharing what we've been seeing or what our clients are wanting. And one of the things that people love about being at home is that they can, or a lot of people can sort of have that solitude whenever they want it. Now that doesn't happen when you have, in my case, when I had my 2-year-old there, that was a challenge. But, I think when you're at the office a lot of times, and especially in offices that maybe were poorly designed, that don't have enough focus or, away from the desk space to get away, people just appreciate that at home, that they can get that whenever they want. And we were jokingly saying that we need to design escape pods within the office footprint where people can literally just my gosh, I've been with people for 4 hours. I just have to be by myself, and I need to be in a place that I'm really comfortable, not necessarily just in a place where I can close the door and I can sit at a desk, but I need to be in a place that's comfortable so that I can recharge. So yeah, that's been interesting. And then lastly, this is a huge one, just reduce carbon footprint in general. I think we've seen over the course of everybody being at home, how much our earth has loved it, us being off the road. And so I think that could be a good thing in the future with some of us being at home a little bit more often. Was there anything else in the chat before I move on from this one, Ken?
There is a question about trends. Why don't you keep going? Because I think it's going to segue into some of the latter slides. So Andrew, we will get to your question here in just a second.
Okay. So really the big thing is, how do we work effectively everywhere, right? I mean, I think in theory, it sounds really great, but then when you start to think about, well, what does it actually mean? How do we do this? What does it mean for real estate departments and, all of that? So that's really where our minds are at, just the beginning conversations around, what do you need? What do you need in order to allow organizations to go to more of a hybrid model of not everybody comes to the office and not everybody stays at home, but how do you offer choice and control over all of that? So the first one is fostering new mindsets and behaviors. So, we've all sort of, to some degree, been programmed that I go to the office and I work from this time to this time. A lot of us tend to work at night, sometimes too, or early in the morning, sometimes too, but those core hours are there. We go to work and then we go home, and it doesn't really have as much regard for what our personal lives demand. So those new mindsets and behaviors really are super important. What do we even think about when we think about work? So the first one, presenteeism, needs to be reduced. So an emphasis on results and outcomes versus, you are here, therefore you are being productive. That was really never a thing. Sorry to burst anybody's bubble. But, the fact that you can see someone doesn't mean they're being effective. So I think, that sort of gets into the second one of train people to work with people. I think that a lot of times it's simple if you think that if I can see someone at their desk, they're working. But it's not simple to think, I have to manage this person effectively. I have to ask more questions. I have to give feedback at certain times throughout the day in order for this person to be effective. Ken and I have been going through, there's some like soft skills type of training going on to just, it's being offered within our organization to just like, and it's particularly important right now because you have people managing very large teams who in person, you know, masters. But then when you go away, it's just been more challenging. And then, you know, not to mention we've had interns come on board. So how do you, you know, add that to the mix? How do you make sure that they're getting the most out of the experience? So training people to work with people is I think one of the most important things on here.
Yeah. So Michelle, if I could just jump into that one very briefly. I mean, we're still a work in progress organization, is for sure. But one of the things that I think we did well is within that first week or two of April, is we very quickly pivoted to a mandatory soft skills training program, really a curriculum for all of our project leads. So anybody that was leading a team was required to go through soft skills training, and we made that jump very quick because we recognized that this was going to be a massive change to the way in which people work together. And we've seen some positive results from that and have made the decision to continue that curriculum in a little bit more protracted way, but nevertheless, still doing what we can as an organization to provide resources to our people, because that's what it comes down to. And happy to share kind of the way we're doing that with people offline. If you're interested, please reach out to us. We're happy to share anything we're doing locally. So.
Yeah. And they are all good reminders to have too. I mean, a lot of the things that come up in soft skill training, you're like, yeah, I know that, but do you practice it is another question. And I think that a lot of people maybe don't practice what they know is important. So because it's hard. So the next thing on here is just planning is accelerated. So this is especially important when we get into the timing of your work topic. But, you know, open our minds into thinking, you know, I was talking to Ken about this earlier. Right now, I am available for meetings between 9 and 5 all week. And that sort of makes my schedule Swiss cheese in a way, in when I'm able to potentially get a big chunk of focus work done, or, you know, I just need to become better at planning that. But I think with people with a more flexible mindset, that planning is going to need to be accelerated. So maybe we have days where we have meetings and days where we don't. I know with anybody who has outside clients, that could pose a challenge, but, you know, but maybe not. Maybe as a culture, if you don't have meetings on Friday, you don't have meetings on Friday. Having in-office or working elsewhere days, you know, Ken mentioned that we helped lead the return to the office team for us, and that's one of the things that we've put into place is to help us all get used to knowing who's here and who's not, you just put it on your calendar. If you're working elsewhere, you know, you put it on your calendar. That way people can easily see when you're here and when you're not. And then lastly, just becoming seasoned in virtual collaboration, networking, and education. So we're all, not that all of these things are going to be always virtual, but we were also talking about this earlier. You know, I think that there's a lot of things that we did in person before that may continue to be virtual, even post-pandemic. You know, whereas we all would go to one place to do something, I think that a lot of times it may happen virtually. So then the next one is we need to accelerate our technology. So the first one's sort of a given, you know, personal work tools and supporting a conducive work environment. That's really to say you know, really if you're working in or outside the office, you need to have the right tools in order to make good collaboration work, really, is one of the main things. You know, you have to be able to be mobile. So if I'm one place one day and one place the next, you can have everything you need. Good internet access, of course. The second one, virtual culture. So I mentioned this in the employee experience piece at the beginning. What does that mean? You know, when all of a sudden some are in and some are out. And again, it doesn't have to be black and white. You're not, you know, in or out. You're in and out. And how, you know, how do you make sure that that's a seamless experience for people? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that it's an intranet. You know, I don't think that that's the only thing that is needed. But like, how do we make sure that people are communicating and cultivating that culture, even if they're not in person every day? And then lastly, an emphasis on tech within the office, making sure that our, the spaces, I mean, because ultimately a lot of people are going to come to the office to meet with other people, but not everybody that they're meeting with is going to be in the office. So making sure that we're designing spaces to foster both in, you know, kind of create that equitable experience for both in the office and outside the office.
And so, Michelle, as you maybe transition to the next slide here, I do want to go back to a question that was raised earlier about, I guess, to use the term equity in location, right? You know, or either between age groups or function, like job function or physical presence, if you're here or working in the office or working remote and things like that. And one of the things that seems to be a common theme, and it's said a lot of different ways, but it's about making sure that no matter what way you work and where you work, you have the same access to participation. Okay. And
right.
I mean, I know in our organization, or at least within our office specifically, you and I and others have set an expectation that no matter how you conduct a meeting, that meeting must be available for every member of a team to participate, either like in person or virtually. And that's an unequivocal expectation of teams and meetings. And it's not a perfect fix. Maybe it's a Band-Aid, but it also hopefully provides opportunity for everyone. And we've worked through some of the I'll say little missteps with that, but nevertheless, we always want to be an embracing organization. We're hearing this from some of our clients, and they're trying to grapple with that because, yeah, I mean, some that have flipped over and are back in the office full-time or mostly full-time or some version thereof, those who are working remote are starting to be left out, right? And we're hearing that from outside of our groups. But, and so I don't see this as a short-term thing when it comes to providing access. I think we have to provide greater and greater access to everybody going forward, no matter where you choose to work or how often. So I know we're going to touch on it again, but just thought that tech piece, because we're all accustomed to working on webcams, and as we found in our own building, we had a few spaces that were used for meeting rooms that didn't have the right technology in them to continue to do what we all could do at home. And so we had to quickly adapt, as I'm sure many of you have done in your organizations as well. So.
Yeah, we have a all staff meeting every week, every Wednesday morning. And so that 90 people are invited to that meeting. And this week we tried it for the first time to do kind of, if you were at the office, you could go into the gallery and everybody was there, or, you know, a lot of people were at home. And we failed miserably. Like, it was, you know, the sound wasn't good, you know, like you couldn't hear it, you know, you couldn't see who was speaking. Like it, I think that you sort of have to have grace for yourself as well to know that, like, we're all still figuring this out and things are different. And I think that, you know, as long as everybody has that mindset, then, you know, you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this didn't work. Because next week it'll be a little bit better, and the next week it'll be a little bit better. But So next is just mastering collaboration. I think that this is one of the pieces that I think gives people the most anxiety, is how do I meet with the people I need to meet with if I don't know where they are. And, you know, it's really like mastering Zooming for various situations. We were talking about this earlier, like, again, I don't think that it's going to be either or. You know, I think in a lot of times we may be meeting someone for the first time and networking over the computer, whereas Ken might have gotten on a plane 4 months ago to go meet somebody for the first time. Maybe you won't do that, you know, quite as often in the future, which again helps that carbon footprint piece. But we need to get good at it. And I think that a lot of us have gotten a lot better at it over the past 3 months because we've had to. You know, Ken and I have had new client meetings virtually, whereas for sure before we would have been in person. And projects move forward, and you gain rapport with people. But again, you just kind of have to get used to how to do that effectively. We talked about this on the last one. Prep the office for an equitable meeting experience, so we won't go too much further into that. But I think that it's just critically important to be thinking about that. And then balancing small talk and business to make up for lost impromptu connections. So I think that this also goes back to that people learning to work with people piece of it, and just understanding that work is stressful, and we need to balance that with connecting with people and, you know, making sure that people feel valued and that we care about what they're going through aside from the deadline that you're working on. Ken, I don't know if you have any more to add on that particular one, but.
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked about this at length this morning, probably due to my part, but yeah, a lot of this goes back again to soft skills and how you're connecting with the people you're working with, and not losing sight of the fact that the I'll say strategies that we're implementing in a virtual world or a remote world really do apply in the physical world, and you know, making sure that we are having those conversations. You know, whether it be small talk or otherwise, because it's possible we're going to see people in person far less than we ever did, and we shouldn't waste that time together. So it's important about connecting when you can.
Yeah. And then lastly, and I think the most controversial, is ditching the traditional 9 to 5. So this is usually the point in the conversation that I'm having with people where they're like, wait, but this doesn't work, but this doesn't work. They've got lots of reasons why it doesn't work. But also find it very appealing to think about, well, I could go work over here. Like Ken is in Maine right now chatting with us. So productivity and peak performance happen at different times for different people. So that's really just talking, you know, that's simply, are you a morning person or a night person? You know, it could be as simple as that. Or it means that, you know, my lifestyle, I'm more productive at this particular time because that's when my kids are at school, or when I was talking to somebody the other day that their husband is a chef, and so he's at home all day and away all evening, and they were like, God, I wish I could just work at the time that he does, you know. And so, like, I think just thinking about people's personal lives, that gets into the next one, and you know, what works better for them, you know, and how can we make our work respond to that. Happy and balanced people equal better business results, period. I mean, when people are able to be flexible with their time as well, they feel more valued and they're more likely to stay, which is obviously super important. And then the last one that I think could spur some conversation: outcome and participation based, not hours based. So that's sort of that like results work mindset. Like, it's not about I work 8 hours a day, I work from this time to this time. It's more about what are you delivering when you do work. And the reason I don't just say results-based is because I think that a lot of us are contributing to things that aren't necessarily our direct results, I guess you could say. So I'm on a lot of different calls where I'm giving input to people, or, you know, it's not necessarily here's what I have done at the end of a week. It's, you know, making sure that people are participating in the conversations they need to at the right time. So again, it's not, I work 40 hours a week and I get my paycheck, and that's, you know, it's more, and again, I don't know the answer to this either. Like, if we had to think about how quickly the pandemic has made us all go to work from home, like if we all of a sudden were unleashed with your people can work at any time, I think that would be way harder, you know, to unleash that piece on everybody. Although that to some degree did happen because people had children at home, and I was one of those where I worked, you know, every couple hours, but for a period of like 16 hours, you know, switching on and off. So it was sort of like we got a taste of it, but you know, that part seems to be the one where it would certainly require some training to learn how to manage that.
Yeah, and, you know, Michelle, I just want to kind of echo a couple things you said there. Kelly, I want to give you a heads up. We're going to go to an open discussion here in just a moment. So, but, you know, a thought on this, ditching the 9-to-5 or results-based or activity-based or whatever, you know, I would challenge everybody to think about this for a little bit, because we recognize this varies by industry, right? You know, there are certain things that require activities that you have to be there for a certain period of time, or they take a certain amount of time to do, or there's certain physicality to them, or in our case, we're a service industry, so maybe there's some more flexibility in that, if you will. But one of the things I would challenge you, as I've challenged a lot of people in this discussion over the last 4 months, is about innovation. I mean, this is a moment that I think from mid-March to the end of April, there was what I call innovation panic, right? You know, it was this concept of, oh no, I'm at home or I'm somewhere remote. I've got to get these things done. I don't know how to do them because I got 14 more other things going on around me. But it's got to happen. And somehow, in most cases, we all found ways to get it done. And so it's like, well, wait a second, if we could do that in a moment of panic, if you will, how can that make all of our organizations better going forward? And I think if you kind of look at it through that lens for a little while, you might start to see new opportunities that none of us could have predicted 5 months ago, because we were very, I'll say, set in kind of the rhythm of what we do in our days and our weeks. So, I mean, we could do a whole hour-long conversation on that last bullet point, and we knew that, which is why it's the last one. But with that, Michelle, I guess I'll give it back.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully I'll be able to see some of your lovely faces.
So at this point, I would encourage everybody that's on the call right now to share your video. Feel free to unmute when you have a question. Otherwise, if you'd like to keep yourself on mute just to keep background noises at a minimum, that would be fantastic. But we had, I think, Ken, there were a couple questions, I think. I know Andrew had a question for sure, that I'll go ahead and just pose. Are there creative examples of new types of worker spaces or partnerships? Maybe corporate partnerships with co-working spaces, internet cafes, public libraries, or whatever? Maybe even examples outside the St. Louis area.
One of our big commercial clients is currently undergoing a sort of a very robust charrette to understand what those opportunities are. So I'm really, it's really amazing that they are investing in something like this, because they work with multiple firms, and they've basically charged all of these different firms for 4 to 6 weeks. Just think about what is possible and what do we need to be thinking about, what could like draw people to the office. And so it's this very just like open mind, and nothing is off the table, right? So everything that we've talked about, you don't have to assume that people are coming in from 9 to 5 or every day or at all. Like, you just sort of start to think about, what do our office spaces need? And most aren't necessarily making huge changes to projects that are in design right now, other than if they want to get people in prior to a vaccine being available, like making small changes in order to do that. But when it comes to like big organizational shifts, we aren't necessarily seeing like direct project implementation just yet. We're more so seeing that brainstorming going on for companies, because it's just a little bit, it's almost too early to start building, you know, for some of these more theoretical discussions. Ken, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I want to build on that
that.
Yeah, I do. I want to build on that with a second example from a different organization that there was a period of time, and probably still is to a degree, but there certainly was a period of time, and let's all use the WeWork example. For those that know, you know, major organizations were renting space from WeWorks or similars as a way to manage the ebbs and flows of real estate needs. You know, so instead of fitting out a space, they would rent it on a short-term or long-term basis. And if they didn't need it anymore, they kind of walked away from it. And that was their, I'll say, real estate contingency strategies. Let's call them those. What we have seen in a few conversations we've had is a very drastic and almost dramatic immediate shift from that thinking. And it's centered mostly around risk, I would say, as much as anything. Is that while that was a very convenient solution, that partnership was a very convenient solution, they can't manage their risk very well in that scenario. And I think that in our conversations, as Michelle's saying, with brainstorming of the one organization and then some others, is they're trying to get their heads around what's the right, I'll say, health-based and legal-based solution for them. And I think in the short term, you're probably going to see a move away from these partnerships until they can really get their arms around it, or there's some post-vaccine solution out there. But yeah, many are starting to, I'll say, backtrack off of those partnerships for the time being.
Yeah, and some that maybe were about to either make a real estate shift or get more space, maybe are backing off from that a little bit. And I will say, though, I think it's hard to know wide scale whether that is because of theoretical work from home situations, or whether it's simply our economy is in a shaky situation, you know, and whether people want to commit to long-term space, which would mean, or typically for themselves, that their companies are going to grow. You know, I think there's sort of two big things at play when it comes to like leases and.
So we have a
There
few
was
more
another
minutes
question.
in the absence of silence. You have another question there, Kelly? I think I see.
I do, yep. There was a bit of a comment that led to a question. So the trends seem to potentially widen gaps between groups of people, older versus younger, more financially, physically mobile versus those who are not. What can be done to reduce the stigma between groups and retain a productive level of cohesion, collaboration, etc.?
Michelle, do you want to start there, or you want me
There's
to?
A lot there.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of touched on that somewhat with the discussion about the equitable space, but if there's more you could go into.
I mean, I think at its core, you just make sure that people have the resources that they need, because those are going to be different for different people. Like, you know, I don't know, this is a really kind of a silly example, but like one of our guys in our New York office literally printed everything. He never really looked at anything unless he printed it. And then he went home and he didn't have that luxury anymore. So he had to sort of be schooled on how to use Bluebeam and how do I mark up, you know, something that I literally would have just printed and then walked it over to somebody's desk. So in his case, he needed to have people like on deck to be able to show him how to do something. So that, you know, that sort of gives me a thought about, you just kind of have to, and that's really like reverse mentoring, right? I mean, he's giving his knowledge to somebody else that maybe has has less experience, but then somebody else is showing him how to use technology. And that happens remotely. So, I think it's really at the core, it's like making sure that we all have resources and that we're all looking out for each other. So if it seems like somebody's struggling with something, speak up, or if you don't know the answer, like tell, this is something that Ken's really good at. Hey, you may want to reach out to this person because I think they're silently struggling. A lot of times that's what happens, is that people aren't necessarily forthcoming about, where that struggle is. So.
Yeah, there's a leadership aspect to it for sure. About when you're in person, there are certain subtle clues and cues that people give off that you can engage somebody in a conversation or an activity or whatever that you lose when I'm looking at a screen that's got 20 different images right here, right, or names. So you certainly, I think, from a leadership perspective, have to start to figure out how to draw people in the right way that connects them for sure to whatever the activity, discussion, or otherwise. But an open question, hope this one resonates, but maybe. I've asked this question openly in our own organization as well as others, and challenge me on it. But at some point, what are, as business owners, what are our obligations to provide equal tools to everybody, whether you're in the office or you are working remote? So we all, everybody kind of scattered, right? And March rolled around, everybody scattered. And it was to some extent what you had in your home to be able to effectively do the task and job we were asking you to do. And I use this in somewhat of a fictitious scenario, but nevertheless, go home, do it. Now, in our case, we very quickly kind of figured out if somebody needed a webcam or we get some monitors, we found a way to kind of manage that in the short term. But if you think long term, you think past the next 12 months, 18, 24 months, whatever that is, at some point, do we have an obligation as organizations to outfit or help individuals understand what an effective remote work environment looks like? And how do you balance that with cost and other things? So I think the economy's got to tackle that at some point. I think every organization is going to have to tackle that in their own way going forward. I don't want to get on the soapbox about it, but I think it's a challenging comment that we must start to think through because it's a long-term solution that's going to need to be developed.
I had a thought on that also fits into a question I wanted to ask you guys. My weird answer to that question is that there's only so much you can do to make up for what a remote worker loses by not being with everyone else, whatever that means. And I say this from the perspective of working at US Bank CDC, where we have 450 people in our division. 300 of them are in St. Louis, downtown. And I've managed people remotely for 7 years. So I feel pretty used to managing a team where a group of them are together in St. Louis and they get the benefit of osmosis learning. And then other people are, kind of at a disadvantage. And I was one of those other people when I started in our Denver office. And remember when I moved to St. Louis, my analogy was I went from working in a dim room to like all the lights were turned on. And then all of a sudden I saw all the stuff that I didn't know what was going on before. So my thought on this is more so how we can shift. And as a manager and leader, I've thought about the power of convening and convening differently and more to kind of get at some of those missing pieces, so that if I got people all over the country, I need to find a way to bring them together at least twice a year in such a way that we can collaborate. And we're doing sprints in our company now around key issues where we put a bunch of people in a room, and we had to basically sublease space out of our tower down the street to come up with enough physical space to run sprints with people. And so we all walk down the street when it's sprint day. And so finding and thinking about incorporating spaces in our offices for those kinds of gatherings is a big question on my mind for that time when it is safe to bring people together again. I want to be thinking about how to convene them to kind of get back some of that collaborative in-person spirit.
For sure. I think that's what we're finding for one of our biggest clients. That is how their office design will shift, is that it will be focused around how to bring people together. You know, a more robust, you know, meeting situation, I guess you'll say, where it's not all conference rooms, it's not all one specific, it's not a training room, it's not a conference room, it's all kinds of different spaces for the you know, whatever your business evolves into. You know, you said you're now doing sprints. Well, what about if 2 years before that you weren't, and so you didn't have spaces for that? You know, making sure that your space is flexible enough to adapt to whatever, you know, whatever kinds of meetings you may have in the future.
And back to your question or comment a minute ago, we have several clients that have made that choice too. If someone is staying home or they're being asked to stay home for, call it 90 days or a later part of their phase return, are getting allowances that are allowing them to bulk up their at-home experience to try to improve that situation. Now, I mean, these are larger corporations. Obviously, everyone can't do that, but there are, at least is that conversation happening right now to try to offset some of that.
Yeah, I had a pretty detailed conversation with a group the other day about that. You know, and they're trying to figure out the financial aspect of it. And I think, how is it equal for everybody? Because everybody needs something different in the remote setting, or are you leaving people out by saying you can come back to the office and therefore you don't get that money to upgrade your office at home? You know, it's complex. And I'm glad to hear that the organizations are doing it. I think I'll say just bluntly, the fear I have is, are we going to get to a point that we're creating a barrier to entry for people? Is I can't go do that job because I can't afford the remote work setting that I have to be able to do my work. So, you know, again, I think that's maybe a longer term conversation, but certainly one we have to address.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love the forward nature of that last question and conversation. I think anytime we can kind of look into the future a little bit as a group and start to speculate what might be on the horizon and how we might be able to address those issues in our various organizations, that does nothing but just help the collective understanding of where we can be going and how we can be doing this responsibly. Makes it that much stronger and more sustainable. So thank you for that. Ken, Michelle, thank you so very much for sharing your hour with us over the lunch hour today. Ken, particularly from Maine, I am so incredibly jealous right now of your location. And Michelle, again, you have a great view out your window too, so that's pretty sweet. But you guys really do appreciate the professional insights you brought to the table today. We had a full house, and I'm sure just soaked up what you had to say. A little bit shy. We had a couple people share their video. We'll work on that for next time. But in the meantime, thank you for all that you do for your clients, for St. Louis, and for ULI. And for anybody else who's still on the call, again, next week we do have another program coming up. It's an insider's tour of Hue at Chroma, which is phase 2 of the Chroma development in the Grove. So watch your email for that. Join us.